Look, I think strike rate's very, very overrated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strike Rate, the Cricket Analytics podcast. And as it's our first episode, we should probably introduce ourselves. I'm Jack Hope, veteran of almost 500 podcasts over at our sister podcast, the Cricket Podcast. And I'm joined by Dan Weston. Dan, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly to kick off the show?
Yeah, sure. First of all, it's so good to be here doing this, the first episode of Strike Rate. I just want to say thanks so much to all of you to have kind of taken the time out of your day to listen to this, and also those who have got in touch with all the questions and support ahead of this first episode. I think both of us have been pretty overwhelmed by that so far, and we really do appreciate you all, so thank you. A bit about me, currently working in English cricket with Kent County Cricket Club as senior data analyst and as data insights manager at Birmingham Phoenix. I've been doing that since the start of the 100. I've also worked in a few overseas comps, including the IPL mega auction in 2022 as well.
Yeah, great. I'd echo what you said there, Dan. Really excited to get this going. We've been talking about it for probably about 6 months, but various things have got in the way of us kicking this off. I think the first question is to begin the show is why have we started Strike Rate? What's the point of this podcast?
Well, for me, the basic answer really is that there's not really an analytics specific cricket podcast currently. The major TV networks, media outlets, written media, websites, etc., they don't particularly cover it to any large degree. And we believe that there's a lot of listeners, viewers out there who will value this more detailed analysis that we're looking to provide over these episodes, hopefully for a long time to come. I also think that there's kind of not that much ability for fans to engage with the main cricket media, and we want to provide an outlet for you to do that as well. So, as we've already said on socials, we really value your questions and topic suggestions. We'll give you a name check when we answer these. Keep on doing that, and definitely get in touch on social media or in the comment section here.
Yeah, absolutely do that. The way this is going to work, we're going to pick a topic each week. Sometimes that'll be topical to what's going on in the cricket world. Sometimes it'll be a guest. Sometimes it'll just be something that we've been asked about and that's sort of tickled our fancy, got us interested, and we'll go that way. We're going to split the show into sort of two parts. First part will be me and Dan having a chat about the topic of the week, and then part two will be your questions and the interactions that we've received on the topic of interest that week. So Dan, this week we're going to be talking about I think the question that you get asked the most, and that is, how do you become a cricket analyst? So why don't you give us like a really brief overview, and then we'll get into some more specific details. How do you become a cricket analyst?
Okay, so yeah, you're right, Jack. I get asked this question more than anyone else. Oh, sorry, anything else that I get asked. Get an email literally every week about it, messages on Twitter, LinkedIn. It's definitely an area that a lot of people want to know a bit more about. I also do a Substack on that, which is you can see at danweston.substack.com. But overall, I think it's really important to be honest with people. It's a tough gig to get involved with being an analyst in a club and getting paid to do a good job, basically. So starting points, I would say would be just to do it as a hobby to start with, and to kind of diarize your work in some way, shape, or form. That doesn't have to be written. It probably will be a lot of the time, but it could also be on to YouTube or things like that as well, podcasts. A lot of different ways that you can diarize your work and then hold yourself accountable for the work that you're creating, but also try and get eyeballs on your work as well. And you never know, sometimes those eyeballs might be from the right people who then get in touch and offer you a job. I wouldn't recommend like kind of cold messaging every single coach or owner in the world, only because I've done it already and it didn't really work very well. I reckon I probably like 2% replied, and one of them was like, "Yeah, we're all good, thanks very much." So I wouldn't bother doing that. It will just be a waste of your time, and also kind of get your hopes up that whenever you get an email back of someone, it's usually a bounce back because you've got the wrong email address, or it's just a slam door straight away in your face. So, and actually on that subject, I think that dealing with the mental side of it is quite tricky. I mean, personally, and we'll get onto this because I know there's questions about it. But when I first started, it was quite difficult actually, because you think that you've got this really, really good methodology and you can help people with the work that you're doing, but they just don't want to know. So you're going to have to get your head around that, which is why I recommend starting it as a hobby alongside, say, a full-time job or something, and then seeing how it progresses kind of organically, and as opposed to quitting your job and getting started straight away. Because I've often thought that, like, you could be the world's best analyst. You could literally have solved cricket, T20 cricket, from a game theory perspective, but the actual process from doing all that work to then getting it to market and then implementing it with a team and then getting it on the pitch, it's not easy. So, like, you could, like I say, you could literally solve the sport, and there'd still be very little guarantee that you'd actually be able to have the chance to implement it unless you're like a millionaire who can buy a team.
Yeah, so that's the overview. I think we're going to get deeper into 4 topics, and this might end up stretching across 2 episodes. I think that's our initial thoughts. So we're going to talk about the starting points. Like, what do you need as the fundamental foundation to even do cricket analytics from a hobby perspective, as you were saying, Dan? Then, like, what skills do you need to be proficient at that hobby? And then probably in the next episode, we're going to talk about, like, what getting a job looks like, and getting into the detail of that. How do you avoid endless bounce back emails and actually get yourself in a room with a coach that might listen to what you've got to say? And then maybe if we've got enough time, we'll talk about, like, what those first interactions are actually like. Right, if we really deconstruct this, like, right down to the basics, though, Dan, when we're talking about cricket, like cricket analysis and being a cricket analyst, it sounds silly, but what is an analyst's job?
It can vary quite a lot. I mean, there's not really a fixed answer to this. I think if you ask a lot of analysts and a lot of people working with teams, their answer will probably be that they code the data, so they're logging ball by ball what's happening in a match whilst it's taking place, and perhaps doing a bit of live video or video presentations pre-match and stuff, setting up all of the cameras and stuff like that, and maybe even going into the nets and doing a bit of mitting or slinging and stuff like that as well. Fortunately, I never got asked to do that because I've got ankylosing spondylitis, so I can't do any of that. So that's a good excuse straight away. Yeah, it's personally, I don't believe in all of that at all. I think that there's a pretty good argument to say that the certain organisations who run national cricket in certain countries try to make analysts do this for their own benefit. I don't believe that's analysis at all. I just think it's data entry, and I think that probably within 5, maybe 10 years' time, AI is going to take over that, and it will be obsolete in any case. So for me, analysis more focuses on insights and decision making, or recommendations for decision making. Actionable insights are much more important than, say, logging data and stuff like that. So for me, I disagree with a lot of the people who think analysis is what I said earlier. I look at it as sort of predictive analytics, working with data, working with numbers, working out what works, finding trends that are perhaps the same for successful teams in each league. What the good teams always do, or usually do, what the bad teams usually do, or often do. This stuff is much more important and can help working with teams. How do you value a player? How do you exploit a player's strengths and weaknesses? How can you work with players to help them understand their strengths and weaknesses and communicate that very effectively? And the communication, I think, is another area that we're going to talk about in a bit as well, perhaps on episode 2. But it's incredibly important to not talk like 2 analysts together if you're talking to a coach or a player, because they're just going to go straight over their head. So you've got to be great at communicating data into kind of bite-sized chunks that they'll understand and then act on, because that's really, really important.
Let's talk about data then, because that that whilst what you're saying there is that what you should be trying to do is tell a story about the data. You need the data in the first place. I think we can probably answer this one to some extent on this episode. Where do you get your data from to begin this journey, if this is what you choose to do?
Yeah, look, that's a very difficult process, and probably is the second most frequent question that I get asked. Look, I ended up building my own database when I first started of every Red Bull and T20 league that was around the world, international cricket as well, everything. So I had this massive Excel spreadsheet, which took forever to load and forever to save, which had every player's performance in every league as an aggregate. So, like, for example, like a Blast player might play 14 games, and that will be one row of that database. And then from there, I kind of spent a lot of time working out the transferability of skill sets from one league to another, and built models on expected player performances and stuff like that from there. That was my first kind of foray into cricket analytics. Where you get the data from is an imperfect concept. So what I would say that you could probably use quite a few sources to start with. I think that for example, matchup stuff, Crickmetric is really, really good. I think that you've mentioned them before on the Cricket Podcast, Jack. And then you can look at, for example, like ECB Premier League data you can get on Cricket Archive. It's only £4.99 a month, so you can understand like which players are coming through a good level in ECB Premier League, for example, if you're interested in English cricket. And then Cricinfo has got summaries for every single league for player performance and all sorts of other stats as well. So actually, there's quite a few sources, but you might need to kind of cross-reference sources or use multiple sources to get one piece of information, depending on what they offer. But a lot of stuff is out there. It's not ball by ball. So you won't be able, well, unless you're extremely proficient at computers, you're not going to be able to get data on, for example, bowler length or shot options for batters and fielding zones and stuff like that for where batters hit the ball. But the problem with that is that gets you to the next level. And to get that kind of information, really, there are quite a lot of gatekeepers out there who don't like the average person having that information.
Yeah, I did a little while ago. I did a little Twitter thread on all the publicly available sources of data that you can find on the web. So if you head over to my Twitter, and I might put a link to this in the show notes as well, you can have a look at. I think I found 12 resources that, to differing extents, can help you learn about the game, provide data for you to interrogate. And one that you'll hear a lot, and this goes on to your ball by ball point, is Crick Sheets. So if you head over there, you can find, well, reams and reams of data, mainly focused on T20, but I think test matches are logged there as well, and ODIs logged there as well. And you can download the ball by ball, line by line data that's been scraped from ESPN. If you're a little bit more proficient, there are, from a coding perspective here, you can scrape the data directly from ESPN Cricinfo, and that might give you some shot information and some control percentage and things like that can be found there. And if you go to the BCCI website, they still have Hawkeye up on a ball by ball basis, so you might be able to, if you're very, very good from a tech perspective, pick up some ball tracking data at that point. That just to throw in a few extra points there. Dan, we've done data and we've done what an analyst is. A personal question here: what made you want to become a cricket analyst in the first place all those years ago now?
Well, yeah, it does feel like a long time now. I mean, like, I've always been really interested in maths and data and figures and stuff. So I remember when I was like 2 years old, I would already knew all my times tables. I was probably by the age of 3, I was solving countdown on the maths and countdown on the TV. My grandparents were super encouraging about that. My grandma in particular was a maths genius as well. So that was particularly like mental arithmetic, and that I've always been kind of minded towards numbers rather than words, although I kind of have upskilled a little bit in terms of the writing over the years. So originally, like, I was doing a lot of kind of online poker and things like that to start with. That was pretty good at times. And again, it's a lot of parallel skills actually, which maybe we'll cover in another episode in the future, between say online poker and working with cricket teams and the draft auction dynamics and decision making and things like that. Then there was Black Friday, which if you're interested in poker, you can Google, and basically American players got kind of banned from playing overnight, which dramatically reduced the player pool and made it a lot harder to win at such a good win rate. So I started looking at getting into other fields as well. I've always liked cricket. I played to pretty mediocre level, like village cricket and stuff when I was younger. I was like, I'm even on 6'3". I was actually a wicket keeper, but I tried to bat like Andre Russell. So that was fun. When it worked, it was good. Didn't work very often though. But like, I used to watch it on TV and stuff all the time, and I kind of realized that the commentators and the graphic displays on the TV were really not that insightful. It was very difficult to infer whether they were right or wrong, and it was very difficult to infer whether the decision made from teams was right or wrong. There wouldn't be that much critique. The commentators would there'd be graphic flying up on screen. Guy's got a strike rate of 115, and the commentator will say, "Oh, he's a great hitter, got long levers and stuff like that." All the cliches. Right. Okay, so 115 strike rate is not really good, even though a basic fan would probably know that. So then I start well, okay, well, I'll identify more. I want to prove that these guys are wrong, and it just seemed to me that there was such a lack of grasp of knowledge about the T20 format in particular from both TV commentators and teams, and it just seemed like a really interesting niche to try and get into. So yeah, that was pretty much what made me want to do it. It definitely led me down a rabbit hole very quickly, but overall it's been pretty enjoyable, although extremely frustrating.
Great. We'll talk about maybe some of the frustrations. I mean, that could be a whole episode in and of itself, I think. Like, obviously, once you've done your recruitment or provided your numbers to the team captain, it's kind of out of your hands to some extent, and it's still elite sport, right? So I suppose you regularly make what you would say was a good choice, and then some unforeseen event blows up, and you have to deal with that. And I think it'd be really interesting to get into that at some point. But to keep our focus on how to become a cricket analyst, we've talked about like why you wanted to become one. We talked about where you can get the data, and we talked about what an analyst is. One of the things that we got asked loads of questions about was what skills do you need. So to wrap up part one, can you give us an idea of what you need from a really basic point of view to become an analyst? And after the break, we've got a few more questions on this from people on Twitter and Substack and LinkedIn. So we'll get into it in a little bit more detail.
Okay, so I think first of all, you've got to be pretty confident with numbers. You've got to be very able to work with numbers, and then from that point onwards, then I think hypothesizing with data, so using the data to answer questions that you might have. So that I've got a pretty inquisitive mind, and I'm always thinking, okay, well, what happens if someone does this? What happens if someone does that? What transferability is there from one thing to another? So I'm constantly, I keep notes on my iPhone, and I just write down stuff non-stop. And then when I have the time, I'll check out different theories and stuff. Sometimes I might realize that actually the theory's wrong, and that's fine too, because then you can learn from that as well. But I think to summarize, numbers, being good with numbers, or at least competent, and having a inquisitive mind for those kind of working out what works and what doesn't, I think is pretty key. I think it's more important to be minded like that, at least from my perspective, definitely, as opposed to someone who's like a really good coder or stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think this is where, and I think it's a pretty good place to wrap up part two. There's probably different analyst jobs, if we're thinking about this from a more macro scale as well. Like what you're describing there might be different to might be different to another analyst's job description, if that makes sense. So whilst you maybe don't need to be extremely proficient in coding, there will be somebody in cricket somewhere, maybe working for CricViz or whatever, or somebody pulling all the data off the ESPN Cricinfo, where that skill might be a lot more useful. I think what you're sort of saying there is that you need to be able to, come up with a theory, you need to be able to test that theory, and you need to be able to tell the story about that theory to effectively do analysis from your perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. The telling a story, as we already spoke about, I think is the really key thing. How you can communicate your findings to people who actually probably do make more of a decision. So whether that's a captain or a head coach, for example, it's no good throwing them like a page full of numbers and then saying, "Oh, look, that means we need to buy him." you've got to be a bit more kind of subtle about how you present it. And generally speaking, I find that the charts work better than a load of numbers, and it's much easier to draw conclusions off like an XY scatter than it is to just a spreadsheet, basically. So yeah, that communication is massive as well.
Great, Dan. We're going to wrap up part one there, then we're going to come back, and we have, we had hundreds of questions to choose from, basically, but we've narrowed that down to a few for this episode, and we'll get stuck into those.